You know, when we think about ancient myths, our minds usually go to these powerful gods living way up on some distant mountain. But what if divinity was much, much closer? Today, we're diving into the world of the nymph, those enchanting spirits the ancient Greeks believed were literally in every forest, river, and mountain. We're going to unpack who they were, what they really represented, and, you won't believe, how their legacy is still shaping our world.
Seriously, just take a second and imagine that. What if every single part of the natural world around you had its own spirit, its own personality? That idea was right at the heart of how the ancient Greeks saw the world. For them, the divine wasn't just in some far-off heaven, it was woven into the landscape itself. Every rustle of leaves, every babbling brook, that could be a sign that you were in the presence of something ancient and alive.
So what exactly is a nymph? Well, the word itself, nymphi, it originally just meant young woman or bride. But in mythology, it came to mean these minor female nature deities. Now here's the key thing to remember. They are not all-powerful goddesses like Hera or Athena. A nymph is a spirit that is fundamentally tied to one specific place, a single spring, a particular grove of trees, you name it. They are the living soul of that location.
Okay, so let's break down their core traits. First off, they are literally the personification of a natural feature, and they're almost always shown as beautiful young women. And they weren't just pretty faces. They had powers. Nymphs who lived in springs were often thought to have healing abilities, while others could see the future. But here's the part that might surprise you. For all their divine nature, they were not immortal. They could live for thousands of years, sure, but if the tree they were tied to was cut down or their spring dried up, they would die with it.
Now, the ancient Greeks didn't just have one vague catch-all term for nature spirits. Oh no, they had a remarkably detailed system for classifying them, based almost entirely on where they lived. Let's take a look at how they cataloged this incredible world of spirits.
And this level of detail, it really shows you just how deeply the Greeks connected with their environment. To them, it wasn't just the forest. It was a place inhabited by dryads. It wasn't just a river. It was the domain of the Potamites. This worldview basically animated their entire landscape, filling it with distinct personalities, unique powers, and, as we'll see, unique dangers.
So here are just a handful of those classifications. You've got the dryads, who are the nymphs of trees, especially oak trees. The naiads, they presided over freshwater springs and rivers. If you were climbing a mountain, you might stumble upon an oread in a grotto. And of course, the 50 nereids were the famous spirits of the Mediterranean Sea. And this is just scratching the surface. The full list is massive, and it paints this picture of a world absolutely teeming with divine life. But here's the thing, nymphs were not just calm, sweet-natured spirits. Just like nature itself, they had two sides. They could be beautiful and life-giving, but they could also be unpredictable, wild, and incredibly dangerous.
And this duality is absolutely central to their stories. On one hand, you see them as these wonderful, helpful figures. They're attendants to gods like Artemis, or they're the lovers and even the mothers of great heroes. But just as often, their run-ins with mortals were, well, hostile and totally arbitrary. They were wild spirits, and you could never, ever truly tame them.
A classic example of their dangerous side is the story of Hylas. He was one of Jason's Argonauts. One day, he goes to fetch water from a spring, and the local naiads, the water nymphs, were so struck by his beauty that they just pulled him under. He was never seen again. Think about it. A simple, everyday task turned deadly in an instant. It just goes to show how dangerous their world could be.
And get this wasn't just some forgotten ancient myth. This belief stayed alive in Greek folklore right into the 20th century. People, especially lone travelers, were warned not to disturb certain places, especially around noon or midnight. A chance encounter could leave you struck dumb, or hopelessly obsessed, or even cause a sudden stroke, a condition they sometimes called nympholepsy, or being seized by the nymphs.
So how did this ancient idea manage to survive for so long? Well, it turns out the whole concept of the nymph was incredibly adaptable. It transformed and merged with other beliefs as cultures change over hundreds and hundreds of years. This timeline really shows you how flexible they were. When the Roman Empire took over, the Greek nymphs started to blend with local Italian water spirits. Then, fast forward to the Middle Ages, and their characteristics get all mixed up with the fairies and elves of Northern European folklore. And, as we just talked about, they survived in Greece itself as the nereids, keeping that core identity. Beautiful, tied to a place, and yeah, potentially very dangerous. Okay, so moving beyond folklore, the nymph had this huge cultural impact, especially in Western art. For artists, they became this powerful symbol of unspoiled nature, of timeless beauty, and this kind of nostalgic longing for a lost classical past. Starting back in the Renaissance, artists in Europe became totally fascinated with one particular theme, the sleeping nymph. You see it everywhere. Paintings and sculptures of a nymph fast asleep in a quiet grotto or next to a spring, often with a little poem warning people not to disturb her sacred rest. But the story behind this super popular artistic theme, it's a wild one. You'd probably think it was inspired by some amazing archaeological discovery, right? Maybe a perfectly preserved Roman statue found in some ruins. Well, the truth is a lot stranger than that. Believe it or not, the entire artistic tradition of the sleeping nymph was probably kicked off by a 15th century forgery. Yep, a fake. An Italian author basically made the whole thing up. He claimed he'd found an ancient Roman sculpture of a nymph, and he even wrote a fake ancient poem to go with it. It was all a fabrication, but the idea was so romantic and compelling that it didn't even matter.
And this is just a brilliant example of the power of an idea, right? Even though it was based on a complete fake, the motif of the sleeping nymph became an artistic staple. It inspired famous paintings and was even recreated in the grottos of these magnificent gardens, like the famous one at Storehead in England. A fake antique ended up inspiring centuries of very, very real art.
So, that leaves us with this final thought. The ancient Greeks animated their world with spirits, giving a face and a story to every mountain and stream. In our modern, scientific world, you could argue we've lost some of that connection. But have we really? Or do we just personify nature in different ways? I mean, think about how often we use terms like Mother Nature, or talk about the fury of a storm. Maybe that need to see a human face in the wild is just as timeless as the nymphs themselves.